Buenas tardes. Se me escucha perfectamente, ¿verdad? Bien, buenas tardes.
English. Hello, my name is Ángel Ortiz. I'm a journalist. I'm the director of Norte de Castilla, that's a 164 years old newspaper, and time is one of my passions. In my profession, you can see one of its aspects, the aspect of the present time, in a very intense way. This is what we call the current time. With the internet, we have seen what we call the digital journalism, which is about following news on the social media. The complexity of my world, the world of journalists and media, have raised. An internet is like hours don't exist. It's like a continuous present that's unlimited, and that's the perfect environment for journalists, analogic journalists like me, get an anxiety crisis, an identity crisis, but this is another story. I have thought a lot about the introduction of this panel, and when I have someone like Ben, which is has a relationship with emergency, with urgency, I could have a great title: The Science for Winning Over the Loss of Time, but not. What is atmosphere and climate for us is context. For our presenters today is much more than that. It's their primary material. So the title of this debate could also be much more direct. The history of humanity, period. Because that's what it is, just a race against the passing of time that inspires development and progress and inventions. This has happened since humans, many years ago, started to be humans. And we started to be aware of the present time, the past time, and especially when we get into a mortgage loan of the future. It's not easy to find research that eventually are looking to accelerate or decelerate a process to make a distance shorter or longer. We all should agree that space exists only because we need time to go through it. Electric light made days longer, fire made our digestions easier, computer science made the more difficult calculations very simple ones. Since we discovered the Higgs boson, the particle of God that could be considered again of the time and the origin of matter. In this race, we have always accelerated the time that we use against the clock, using an artillery which has always better accuracy. And for many years, we have been familiar with concepts like immortality or immortality. María Blasco and Helen Pilcher focus on winning over the loss of time, so that in the case when we're fighting disease, that minutes become hours, hours become days, days become weeks, and then years, or in the case of the latter, biology combined with environmental awareness becomes sometime a machine of time that will give second opportunities to humanity. So I now give the floor to María Blasco. She's from Alicante. She completed her PhD in the Center Severo Ochoa. She, in 1993, in the University Autónoma de Madrid, and then she moved to the Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory of New York City, where she joined the lab of Carol Bader. 4 years later, she returned to Spain as the manager of the microbiology at the CSIC. Then she moved to the Oncologic Research Center, focusing on telomeres and telomerase, and she's become the director of the center, and she's a member of the European Association. In 2012, she became honor ambassador of Marca España. I give you the floor, María.
Hola, buenas tardes. ¿Se me oye bien?
Hello, good afternoon. I don't know if you can hear me. Okay. In my group, we're interested in getting to know the causes of illnesses so we can heal them, treat them. And one of the big advances for the humankind, it's been actually getting to know the origin of some illnesses, for example, infectious diseases. Sorry, I don't know exactly how this works. For infectious diseases, only once we found the origin, we've been able to heal them and to treat them efficiently. And this has had an impact in our life expectancy. It was 30 years at the beginning of the 20th century, and we've duplicated this thanks to the healing of these infectious diseases. Now we can reach our 80 years old, but we found different illnesses like diseases like cancer, cardiovascular diseases, degenerative diseases, and as scientists now we think that there's also a common cause for all these illnesses, that it's not a bacteria, it's the molecular aging of our cells. This is one example. Cancer, for example, we see the consequences of aging. We see the different ratings between men and women. We also have it in children, but it's not so frequent. And it's the same in heart failure. You see that it's very rare to find it in earlier ages, but then from a certain age it is more likely to suffer from this kind of diseases. So it's very interesting to understand aging biology so we can just understand these pathologies and heal them and treat them. This is also a socioeconomic problem because you can see here the demographic pyramid in our country. We have a comparison between the year 2015 and 2050, when more than a third of the population will be over 65 years old. So the risk of this kind of diseases is higher, much higher. So it's important to understand all this so we can prevent and avoid the appearance of these illnesses. This is how we think. Many scientists would think like this. We think that when we're young, it's rare that we suffer these diseases. And then when we age, we see these causes for these different diseases, taking aside infectious diseases. So actually, diseases would be just the consequences of this molecular aging. So these causes may be genetic. Maybe we can get to be 122 years old, and that is determined by our genes, but it's also a consequence of our way of life. Our lifestyle determines our life expectancy as well. So we can have certain indicators to study the aging of people and the speed of that aging, so we can detect the risk that individuals have of suffering these illnesses. So scientists, if we are right about this, we should be able to determine the life cycle of certain species, and as a consequence of this, we should be able to slow down the consequences of these diseases. So the objective, the goal, is to understand aging so we can prevent and avoid the appearance of these illnesses. This changes our paradigm, but before we get there, I would like to tell you something very important, and it's that illnesses don't show up the day that the doctor diagnoses that disease. They are there before. This is a study from the Cardiovascular Diseases Center. They checked certain indicators in healthy individuals, and you can see here the comparison between women and men 40 years old in both cases, and these risks were detected in people who were completely healthy. And it's the same thing in Alzheimer and cancer. When we find or diagnose a tumor, probably it's been there for years. We just weren't able to see it. So this shows the importance of understanding this aging process. This, as I was saying, is a paradigm change because diseases are very different from each other. There are different causes. So what I'm saying is that actually all these pathologies have a common origin, which is the aging process. And only if we understand and get to know that process, we will be able to stop and prevent or slow down the appearance of these diseases. Which are the causes for this aging process? They are complex, but I want to show you how aging is something that is very flexible. Nature shows us. We are not the individuals with the longest life cycles in nature. And nature shows us that, for example, mice live up to 2 years, or some plants that can live up to 80,000 years. Some species are similar to each other. Mice and bats, for example, they have similar size. And mouse live up to 2 years and bats up to 40 years. So we can see how with very little genetic changes, nature can change a lot. We are here, humankind, and we are not the ones with the longest life cycle. Whales live up to 200 years, turtles up to 250 years. Oysters even longer. We found a shark in Greenland that was very old. They reach their sexual maturity when they're 250 years old. As you can have an idea, the shark was born when the year that Felipe II, king, died. So this shows you how genes adapt to different species, and there's no physical limit, there's no biological limit that determines the life expectancy of a species. This is very inspiring. So we are really excited about finding out the causes of the aging process. Many scientists have been studying about this. On this wheel, you can see some of the molecular causes of aging. I've focused on studying one of them, which is the shortening of one's structures, telomeros, in our DNA. And these telomeros are multiplied and they get shorter and shorter, and this determines aging, the aging process, this telomeres shortening. And our biology has an antidote against that shortening. It was found in 1985, and the person who discovered it received a Nobel Prize in medicine. And thanks to this, we can preserve some species. So there's a system to reset those new telomeres, and the individual can reestablish its system. This takes place in most tissues, and this is a cause for aging. Cancer is an illness associated to aging, but its characteristics are peculiar. There are some cells that cause diseases, and the cells in this case are immortals, and that's why cancer is cancer, and it's not just any other degenerative disease. So for a cell to be immortal or to have an infinite life, we need these telomeres. There are individuals that have mutations, and they will age earlier than others. Their life will be shorter because their telomeres end before others. So the amount of telomeres we have is a limitant factor for our cycle of life. We also know that there are individuals that have shorter telomeres than normal, and these individuals have a higher risk of death due to different illnesses. So this may be an indicator for the aging process, and this may help to diagnose a higher risk for an early death. But so I can finish, I want to show you what we've done in my group to show how this telomeric shortening determines the aging process, or how it is significant of how we age. We carried out a research with mice. We artificially introduced telomeres from adult organisms, and we got them to live 40% longer. So it would be like if with human beings we got humans to live up to 120 years, which is the maximum life expectancy we can have. And after that age, then we start getting the first mice dying of cancer or any other illnesses. So in the ones with these telomeres, the first one that died 3 times later. So we are actually making the lives of these mice in the research longer. Here, for example, you can see how with 3 years old, while all the other mice had died, these ones with the longer telomeres are still alive. This is an image of 2 mice. They are the same age, the same chronological age. It would be like a human who would be 80 years old. The one on the left is the normal one. You can see it's clearly old. And then the other one is the one with the longer telomeres. And even if it's a mouse who's quite old, he looks younger than the other one. And you would ask me, well, what would happen with human beings? Well, we don't know if the effect would be the same as in mice or a different one. But if the effect was the same, if we got from a healthy life, if we were able to duplicate the healthy life expectancy, just the way we did it with the mice, in the end, the level of illnesses would be lower, because we would reach our oldest age free from these diseases. So we would have longer life expectancy. Right now it's 120 years. Okay. We cannot right now create transgenic human beings, but we can work on creating drugs or therapies that can improve our organism to see whether this could also slow down the appearance of certain pathologies. We've done this with mice also to try that this therapy would work. We took mice with telomerasa, intravenous treatment, and we saw how we were slowing down not only one pathology but many different pathologies: diabetes, osteoporosis, and cancer, which we were really concerned about, because maybe we thought that maybe we would be causing higher risk of cancer, but no, it's also related to the same changes in our cells. So we were also delaying or slowing down the appearance of cancer. And some people tell me, well, there has to be something negative. But to prove that there is nothing negative, I can show you how they live 24% longer. And 13% more when we treat them when they're already old. So the treatment was more effective if we started earlier in their lives. So I hope I showed you how this causes for aging is this shortening of the telomeres, because we can manipulate, we can modify this and delay the appearance of many pathologies, so the mice end up living longer. Obviously, nobody thinks now that we are going to heal ourselves with these kind of therapies to live longer, but it's interesting how we can maybe use this kind of techniques to heal illnesses that we cannot heal so far. We've proven this efficient to individuals who have very short telomeres, and more recently in pulmonary fibrosis. We've done this with animals. It's true that it's not available for human beings yet, but we've also seen how we can use this therapeutically once that the illnesses have been diagnosed. I don't want to take too much more of your time. And I finish with this last slide. We want to understand our aging process, not to become immortal, but to be able to heal and treat illnesses. And this is just a picture of my research group, because all these experiments, we've been working on them in Madrid, and I want to thank them too for their work. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, María.
Thanks, Maria. Now is the turn of Helen Pilcher. He's a PhD in biology by the Institute of London. He left the lab to focus on scientific dissemination. She uses humor, monologues. She focuses on stem cells, and she's still passionate about this field. She is now writing her second book that will be published in 2020, and will focus on how humans have changed evolution among animals. His first book, The Return of the King, is about the ability of scientists to give back life to extinct species as a way to save threatened species. She also runs workshops for researchers. Thanks. I give you the floor.
Hi, thank you very much for having me. I hope your translation devices are working okay. Can you nod your head at me if you can understand me? Great. So thank you very much for having me here. It's a real pleasure to be here. Maria has just been talking about how we may be able to change time at the cellular level. I'm going to talk to you now about how we may be able to change time on a much broader level. So I want us to not think about cells now, but to think about geological time. So there has been life on Earth for 4 billion years. And during that time, many species have gone extinct. In fact, 99% of all of the species that have ever lived have gone extinct. Extinction is a normal part of life on Earth. However, scientists are now working to change this dogma and bring species back from extinction. I'd like to start by showing you my favourite photograph of me ever. So this is me here. I'm the girl in the little red boots. This is me when I was 2 years old with my mother and my brother. This smudge here, this is my father holding the camera with his finger over the lens, so it's a family photograph. And I'll point out two things to you. One is same hairstyle, and the second one is that the rocks here in this photograph are 198 million years old. This is a beach in the south of England, and I used to go there when I was a child and look for fossils. I still go there now, and if you're really lucky, sometimes you can find the bones of dinosaurs on this beach. And when I was a little girl, I wondered what it would be like to meet a dinosaur. I'd be interested to find out. Please put your hand in the air. If it was safe and of no danger to you, who here would like to meet a living, breathing dinosaur? We're not all convinced, some of us. So when we talk about de-extinction, the first thing that everybody asks me is, what about dinosaurs? Can we bring back dinosaurs? Everybody has seen the Jurassic Park films. And I need to tell those of you that are excited to see a dinosaur that sadly it won't happen. So to de-extinct anything, we need DNA. And DNA is a very fragile molecule. It breaks down over time. Now, we can get it from fossils, but only fossils of a certain age. There is a cut-off point, and that cut-off point is about 1 million years ago. So dinosaurs died out 65 million years ago. So no dinosaur DNA, no dinosaurs, sorry. So the closest we can hope to get to seeing a living, breathing dinosaur is perhaps this. This is my dog wearing a dinosaur costume. So we have to forget about dinosaurs. But I do want to tell you a story. It's a story about a goat, a very special goat. So this is a type of goat called a bucado. And this animal lived in the Pyrenees for thousands of years. And they were fantastic animals. They were big, strong beasts. They weighed about as much as a washing machine, but they were much more fast and quick. And they had these enormous, great big horns. And what they used to do was stand around on the hillside, casting impressive silhouettes against the clear blue cloudless sky. And they were very good at that. And then, in the 19th century, we came along and we saw them and we saw their horns and we thought, do you know what? Those would look amazing there on our wall. And we started shooting the bucado. And we were really successful at killing them. So if you fast forward to the year 1999, there was just one bucado left, an elderly adult female called Celia. And scientists knew they had to do something to try and save the bucado, so they went out and they caught Celia and they put a radio tracking collar around her neck so they could at least follow her movements. And that was all fine. But then at the beginning of the year 2000, the radio tracking collar let out a beep. Beep, beep. And the scientists knew something awful had happened. So they raced up the mountain and they found Celia, and they found that she had been crushed to death by a falling tree. So the bucado went extinct. And that should have been the end of it. We teach our children at school that extinction is forever. But scientists had other ideas. Now, this is the work of Spanish scientists. This is a Spanish story. So this is the work of José Folch and Alberto Fernández Arias from the Research Institute at Zaragoza, not far from here. And if we rewind to where they put the tracking collar on Celia, they did one more thing. They took a biopsy sample. They took some of her cells and they grew them in culture and they froze them down. And after the bucado went extinct, they revived the cells and they used them for cloning. The same kind of experiment that years before had produced Dolly the sheep. And something incredible happened. So there were hundreds and hundreds of failed attempts. This is very difficult science. But eventually they created a cloned bucado embryo, which they transplanted into the womb of a surrogate goat, and in 2003, a little baby bucado was born. The bucado came back to life. It was a dogma-changing moment. And when the little bucado was born, the room was full of vets and scientists, and they held their breath. And she was beautiful, this little bucado. She had brown fur and hazel-coloured eyes, and she was perfect. But then all too suddenly, things started to go wrong. And she developed breathing problems, and she died 10 minutes later. So, the bucado wasn't just the first animal ever to become de-extinct, it was also the first animal ever to go extinct twice. And I don't know how that story makes you feel, but for me, it leaves me with mixed emotions. I feel very sad that we treated the bucado so badly, but really excited for what might be possible. And I can tell you today that there are at least a dozen projects ongoing trying to bring extinct species back to life. We're not about to see a de-extinct animal anytime soon, but I do believe this technology is becoming possible. This is perhaps the most famous example, the woolly mammoth. There are 3 groups in the world trying to bring back the woolly mammoth. 2 groups are using cloning. Another group is using a different technology. They're using something called CRISPR-Cas9. I like the pointer. CRISPR CRISPR-Cas9 is a technology that lets scientists edit DNA with pinpoint precision. So what they can do, we have the woolly mammoth here on this side, and we have its closest living relative, the elephant, over here. We have the genetic sequences of both animals. We can look for differences in these sequences, and using CRISPR-Cas9, we can edit the genetic essence of a mammoth into an elephant cell and use that as a starting point for life. These are some of the other animals that scientists are working to bring back from extinction. So just briefly, we have the passenger pigeon, which is a bird from North America. We have the aurochs, which is the ancestor of modern cattle. And we have the gastric brooding frog, which is an amazing animal from Australia that went extinct in the 80s. And what was so special about it is that this frog brooded its tadpoles inside its stomach, and the tadpoles developed into frogs inside its stomach, and when they were fully grown, the females just burp them up. So, round about now, hopefully there should be a question emerging in your head. And that question should be, why? Why would scientists do this? Why would we mess with the laws of time? And I think there are a couple of good answers to this question. The first one is, think about what we may learn. For example, if we bring back the gastric brooding frog, we may learn how it manages to turn its stomach into a womb. To do that, it has to turn off the acid in its stomach. That could be useful for people recovering from stomach surgery, for example, or people who have ulcers. Another reason is maybe we have a moral obligation. We live in a time of mass extinction. I said at the beginning that extinction is normal, and it is, but not the extinction that we are seeing right now. There is a normal background rate of extinction that happens all the time, but currently extinction rates are 1,000 times higher than during pre-human times. We are losing biodiversity at an incredible rate, and it is because of our actions. Maybe we have a moral obligation. I think it's a good argument, but I don't think it's good enough. For me, the argument is maybe it is worth us developing the technology to de-extinct certain animals because they could increase biodiversity. And they increase biodiversity not just by bringing them back, but if we choose the species carefully, if we choose keystone species. Now, a keystone species is a species that creates opportunities for other species to thrive. So woolly mammoths are a keystone species, so are passenger pigeons, so are many of the other animals that I showed you. So if we bring them back, we don't just raise biodiversity by having them there, we raise it further by the knock-on effects that they create for the environment. So de-extinction isn't about creating lonely zoo animals, it's about creating healthy wild animals that you could use to enhance the health of an ecosystem. But there's one more point I would like to make, and it is this. For me, my excitement about de-extinction isn't about bringing back the dead. It's actually about helping the living. This is the northern white rhino. There are just 2 northern white rhinos left in our planet, and they are a mother and a daughter, and so there is no way for this species to continue. It is already extinct, even though we have living animals in a wildlife reserve in Kenya. But the techniques that scientists are developing to bring back animals like mammoths and passenger pigeons can be applied to the northern white rhino and other animals that are so desperately endangered that they are currently beyond saving. And for me, this is the real excitement of de-extinction technology. Maybe it's a good idea to bring some species back from the dead, but it is definitely a good idea to try and hang on to the ones that we have. And I'd like to finish with a quote. It's from the movie Spider-Man. It was Uncle Ben in Spider-Man who said, "With great power comes great responsibility. We need to choose our future very, very carefully." Thank you for listening.
Bien. Nos van a poner ahora unas sillas. Yo escuchando a María.
Well, listening to Maria, I thought what would counselor of health that has to manage in financial terms, he has to manage resources. Please, you can take a seat.
Aquí, ¿verdad? Ellos. Sí. Ellas aquí. Sí. ¿Verdad?
Okay, you sit there. That needs to manage resources to care for people that it seems will live longer. We will live longer and with a better quality of life. I guess that sometimes they get scared because if this happens too soon and we are having problems already, well, what I've said is exactly this. We are now living longer, but we are aging the same way we would that in the prehistory people would age. So what's happening is that we are seeing more diseases related with aging. The only way to live as long as we live now with a good quality of life and to have the longer life expectancy for our species, which is over 600 years, is delaying this biologic aging process, which is the origin of diseases. So I guess that the health ministry would need us to live as healthy individuals as long as possible. Yeah, healthy and working, you mean. Wait, my question for both of you, which is a typical question, is when are we going to see that what we are seeing now in experiments with animals, what we are forecasting that will happen with some species, will become a technology, a daily life technology, or not exactly daily life, but like a very normal technology, so that we can say that in a few generations' time, our children will have a life expectancy much longer than us, or in a few generations will be able to recover an extinct species, for example, to fight a plague. So what would be the time horizon, and what would be the factors for this horizon to be longer or shorter?
Okay, so I'll leave Maria obviously to talk about human health, but in terms of de-extinction, going back to the story of the Bucado, I've spoken to Alberto many times, one of the lead scientists, and he is convinced that the only thing that is stopping him from making not just one healthy Bucado, but many, is resources. It's time and it's money. Now, that is because he knows a great deal about the biology of this animal. I don't think de-extinction will ever become commonplace or easy. Every species needs its own culture conditions, has its own DNA sequence. Just because we can bring back one species doesn't automatically mean it's easy to bring back another. We progress by making small incremental steps in knowledge. So I don't think we're about to see herds of woolly mammoths rushing through the building anytime soon, but if I were to put a time scale on this, I think the animals that may become de-extinct most quickly are the ones that have fast life cycles because they are easy to work with. So I think If I were a betting woman, which I'm not, I think the gastric breeding frog looks like a likely contender, so does the passenger pigeon. Not the woolly mammoth. There are too many problems. But as I say, for me, the real excitement here is about helping living species also. But I'm intrigued to see your views on human health.
Regarding, I don't know whether to do this in English or Spanish. Maybe for a debate it's better that I speak in English. So I think it could be also pretty soon that we can see ways to activate telomerase in order to treat diseases associated with aging. For instance, in the case of pulmonary fibrosis, this is a disease that is lethal. There are no current treatments that actually work to cure these patients. We have already shown in mouse models, which is like a preclinical model, that we can stop the progression of pulmonary fibrosis once we diagnose it in mice. So I think it's a matter of resources. It's a matter of the interest of pharmaceutical companies to want to develop this into a treatment. And I think this is very realistic, right? To be able to treat a disease associated with aging by understanding the molecular causes of aging. I think it's more futuristic to, as a society, as humanity, to decide whether we want to, live longer and delay aging if you want. We want to be younger for longer times, and because I think that implies many more things. But treating a disease with the knowledge that we are getting from understanding aging may be a way actually to have things that work, because many of the diseases associated with aging, there are no treatments that work. I mean, they are all of them incurable, many of them.
Is it too late for you and me?
I don't think so. I don't know.
Siento no poder acompañarles con el inglés.
Well, I like to use English also, but I'm not fluent in English, so I'll use Spanish. How does it change us as a society, this progress? The technology does not change what we do, it changes what we are in many aspects. You have mentioned this, you have pointed out, and I think it's very interesting. And do you think that this debate is taking place at the right levels? The debate on the question, do we want to live longer? Do we believe in societies that will be able to manage our environment in ecological terms, but also our life in terms of life expectancy? Your perception as scientists, is it that this is becoming easier, or is it more difficult?
Economic powers, political powers.
All of this will become more easy, but I think as a society we need to focus on the problems that we think are most important. So Maria's approach is so brilliant, because what it says is that there may be a common cure for many, many diseases. It's, in English we would say, a no-brainer. This is such a good idea. Now with de-extinction, yeah, we could work on bringing back this species or that species, or, and actually we can do both of these things, or we could look at the root cause that's driving animals to extinction. Ultimately, I think we need to be looking at climate change, at the way we feed our society, the way we eat, the way we mass produce livestock is contributing to this biodiversity decline that we're seeing. So I think developing the technology for de-extinction is a really, really good idea, because there may be many repercussions that we can't foresee. But for me as well, we must never take our eye away from what the broader picture is. Now, the brilliant thing about Maria's work is that she's looking at the broader picture, and using the broader picture, you may have a therapy that could be, honestly, game-changing for humanity. If this becomes widely available, this would be the biggest breakthrough of our time.
there are actually many scientists that are now working on aging because of that, because we are not able to cure diseases associated with aging, and this is generating a lot of suffering, and people are dying prematurely of these diseases. But I wanted also to say that I didn't know this story about the bucardo, and I think it's not only a beautiful story, but if I was the Minister of Science of this country, I probably would fund this project, because this is something very important. As far as I understand, it's the first time that actually was achieved to bring back to life something that was extinct, and this has been done in Spain. So I think this is something also, very important.
I think it's amazing that it is, I think it's so fabulous that it is a Spanish story, and the scientists behind it, their research has kind of progressed and then stopped when they run out of money, and then it started again, and then they run out of money. So it all comes down to funding. And I began to explain why there may be good reasons to consider bringing extinct species back to life. Another one that is worth thinking about, and Alberto feels this very strongly, is the bucardo in the area where it lived is a cultural icon. Mm-hmm. This is symbolic with this part of Spain. So it could be really good for Spain if these are very, very high quality scientists. It could be really good for Spain, and also at a time in parts of the world where trust in science is becoming eroded, and where maybe we would like more young people to become interested in science. Doing something like this could be so incredible. It could be biology's equivalent of putting a man on the moon. This is incredible what they achieved, and even though the bucardo only lived for 10 minutes, to get to that point, the amount of work they had to do to get there is phenomenal. It's disappointing that the little bucardo died, but it should not take away from the fact that there was some really impressive science that was done along the way to get there.
Tienen posibilidad, por supuesto, de hacer.
You can ask some questions if you want. Please don't hesitate if you want to ask any questions to any of the speakers. You can just raise your hand. We'll hand you a microphone so we can get so you can ask your question. So we agree that time means money, and also and it helps accelerating research. So together with money, it's important to get more people's interest in science, in these research projects. So these scientific advances may help us delay the extinction of some species, and bringing this back to a field that I'm more familiarized with. Nowadays, we're living in an environment where many things, especially related to medicine, new medical advances, new medical researches that may bring improvements for our health, they take place in a moment where we can't always check if the information is reliable. And I wanted to know if you suffer this in your daily life, if you think that we may tackle this providing more clear and transparent information, if we can get more people interested in science. How do you leave all this fake news that we are suffering in the scientific arena nowadays? Well, they've been told that with this pill you can heal diabetes, or that this invention is going to cure cancer in 2 weeks, or things like that. I wouldn't be surprised if a couple of days from now we would be hearing that mammoths are going to be running down our streets. Maria.
Scientists are working on things that seem almost unbelievable, by society. And we scientists know what is real, what is not real, what is science fiction, what is science. We can tell apart. But when society gets some of this news, I think it's very important the job of the journalist, of the person that is actually telling society what is the importance of what the scientist has done, and to tell this in a very rigorous manner, to avoid exaggeration and also to prevent from people trying to make money out of selling something that is not true, right? But I think this happens since the very beginning. I imagine that when Darwin, discovered, that evolution, there were all kinds of things that were said in Britain. I don't know, but I imagine that it's very important that we scientists, we know what is true, what is not true, what is realistic, what is still very far away and may happen, but very long down the road. But when we tell this to society, it may get, we may create false expectations, and people may use that to try to sell things that are not working, or.
¿Algún consejo para los que?
Any advice for us here so we can identify fake news from real ones, or? Well, I think I can say that in Spanish. I think it's very important to have specialized press that are serious. I know that Helen is communicating. She's working seriously in this field. We have very good specialized journalists in our country, and I think it's essential that we don't believe things that are actually unbelievable, that are unconceivable. People who are saying that we will be immortal in 20, 30 years. I mean, well, that's not true. Obviously, that's impossible. So I think we need to compare and analyze information. Helen, this is something that you're an expert in communication. So what's your opinion?
I apologise on behalf of all rubbish journalists in the world who, as a journalist, I find it just as frustrating as the next person when fake news appears. I think Maria is right. I think there is a very important role for specialist science journalists. I've worked as a science journalist for many, many years. I began my career at the journal Nature, which is one of the world's best scientific journals. It publishes the most high quality research that there is. And when I began working at Nature, I started writing their press release. So a press release is a document prepared by a research institution or a company or a magazine, and it summarizes what the development is, what the science is, in an easy format which can then be given to journalists to help them write their story. And I still write the press release for Nature today, 15 years later, not all the time, but sometimes. And we are so careful not to hype or exaggerate or mislead. The problem comes further down the chain because non-specialist journalists pick up a story and it doesn't get reported well, and as a journalist you might prepare a story that is perfect and just so, but then the editor, the person above you, sees it and they will change it and they will give it a really exciting headline that does not reflect the science. And ultimately this is driven by the people who own the media. So we can't forget that the reason that news is there, we would like to think it is to inform us, but news is there to make money. So the people who are in charge of these news channels are the ones that ultimately skew the agenda. Now, what I think is so important in all of this is that scientists themselves have the opportunity to speak about their research and have the tools to do that confidently. So I'm involved in a number of different programs where I go in and I work with scientists and I train them and I explain to them how the media works, and I explain how to get your point across to the media, how best to work with the media to improve communication skills, because I would probably be a very happy lady if ultimately the scientists got so good at this they did me out of a job. I would accept that. So ultimately, scientists need to be good communicators, and they need to be able to trust people like me to do a good job. Now, if I work for an outlet and they change what I've written or they misrepresent it, I'm a freelancer, I work for myself. Personally, I don't work for them again. So I tend to work for outlets that are very highly thought of, because that's the kind of journalism that I want to write, journalism with integrity. But yeah, this is a problem. And if you want to find out if something is fake news or not, what I would urge you to do is start searching around on the internet, and a decent story about a piece of science will always have a link to the original paper. Go back to the original paper. The first paragraph might be difficult to read, but if you really want to find out what's going on, you will get an idea from that paper. Don't be frightened to go back to scientific papers. They are so interesting.
¿Hay alguna persona que quiera plantear?
Are there any other questions? Yes?
Hola, buenas tardes.
Good afternoon. Until today, I had never seen the two topics you have presented, the de-extinction and telomeres, and I really thank you for being so clear, because not being an expert, I have understood everything, but what I'm concerned about are the ethics, the ethical aspects of it, both for aging, delaying aging, and also bringing some species back to life. How do you manage these ethics in both fields? Well, let me start. In the case of aging, we scientists, we think that this is the origin of diseases that are killing us, most of them in a premature way and causing suffering. So starting when you are 40 or 50, the risk to develop cancer, infarction, Alzheimer is very high. And the only way to delay or prevent the presentation of these diseases in a premature way is to stop aging, or also we don't have treatments when these diseases present, like Alzheimer or infarction or heart disease. People that are diagnosed with these diseases, there's nothing that can stop the progression of these diseases. So what I'm saying is that if we stop this aging process, we might have new therapies or new ways to treat these diseases that might be effective for the first time in history, and this is based on a deep knowledge of aging. No scientist is thinking that we will use this to make life longer, but we are doing it first to learn. I think knowledge is very important. It's the only way to move forward as humanity, and this knowledge will tell us why these diseases are developing. This is what we expect, so that we can have better ways to treat them. To be able to heal someone with lung fibrosis, where we don't have any drugs that are effective, and maybe these therapies based on knowledge on aging could work.
As well with Maria's work, that you're talking about maybe a tablet that somebody could take. We're not talking about altering somebody's internal genetic makeup. That's a much bigger debate. So I think it's hugely important that ethics are considered, and it's worth saying also that in any research institute, scientists can't just do what they want. They have to submit proposals to regulatory bodies that think about these ethical implications and determine whether or not research can progress or stop. Now, I just came from Burgos, where we were having a similar discussion, and somebody from the audience said, perhaps we need a global ethical body to look at all of this. And I think that's a really noble idea. That would be a wonderful thing if it were possible. Yeah. But it would be incredibly difficult, right?
Yeah.
So currently it's sort of done on a case-by-case basis. It's not perfect, and what it means, of course, is that things that are prohibited in one country may still be allowed to happen in other countries. In China, there is work on editing human embryos, again with a therapeutic purpose, but it's research that would not be allowed in other parts of the world. And with de-extinction, it's early days. We have time as a society to see how comfortable we feel about the prospect of bringing back extinct species. Again, the scientists doing this research do so within very carefully controlled ethical and regulatory boundaries. So now is the time for people like us to be talking about these kind of technologies so that you have an opportunity to have an input. You know, I think we live in exciting times. We have the power to profoundly influence human health and the state of our planet. And this is a discussion that everybody should be involved in.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And also regarding the extinction, in a way, we have been responsible of the extinction of many species, and at least the more recent one, not the dinosaurs. So we should also feel morally obliged to try to bring some of them back to life, because we are the ones that, make them disappear.
Bueno, ¿alguna pregunta más?
Well, do we have any other questions? Well, I have a last question. We still have 5 minutes. Everything that you have said has a global dimension that affects all humanity. All this research, all these progresses, could it be that they make or they bring more inequity to society, so that there will be some societies that are wealthier and can benefit from this development, and then the poor societies will have to face some dystopic situations where we will see some modern societies and advanced societies with people that live better and for a longer time. So this scenario, how would you control or limit? What can you do? Because as what you have said, you have the mandate to learn and to gain insight and knowledge. But then from the point of view of the big corporations, how is this managed and controlled?
First, I would like to say that this is something that is already happening. Life expectancy in Spain is 95 years old, but in Zimbabwe it's 40 years old. So even in the developed world, if you go to a city like Washington, D.C., life expectancy in some neighborhoods goes up to 80-something, and in some other neighborhoods maybe it's 50. Or even lower, because of economic situation, context, maybe higher risks in certain neighborhoods. This is serious, and this is something that we need to tackle. But that can't prevent knowledge from progressing. Doctors need to keep healing and treating cancer patients, and they need to keep doing it regardless that therapy not being able to reach everybody. So I think that we cannot limit knowledge. We need to try and work in everything, getting to list more vulnerable countries at a certain moment. I think we're living this already. Research is progressing. We are getting new cures. We have immunotherapy right now. It's something relatively new, and it's increasing survival rate a lot. It's very expensive. Obviously, we cannot reach all countries in the world with these therapies, but that should tell us not to use it with cancer patients. No, as you were saying, an ethical or ethics organization could be considered, for example, as some circumstances that can be assessed at a global level, maybe some techniques. We should receive guarantees that we are not going to use those techniques based on profitability, right? When it's a very relevant therapy or progress, right? We should be able to provide that warranty.
That the pharmaceutical companies who ultimately will put in there is a huge amount of money spent on taking a drug through to the point where it can be used routinely on people. You may have a better idea of the sort of figures involved, but it is a vast amount of money. Yeah. So ultimately, the people who develop these drugs, in the early stages they start in academia, maybe they then turn into a startup, a biotech company. Eventually maybe that then gets taken over by some big company with lots of money, and yes, there will be patents filed. Somebody will own the intellectual property behind these ideas, and that is of huge concern. It's not a perfect world. We need money to develop these sorts of cures. However, there are instances, and again, you might be able to tell me if I'm not remembering this properly. There have been instances where there have been really good cures for diseases that were not being used in the third world because they were too expensive. Is it HIV?
HIV, for instance. HIV.
So in HIV,
people were dying in Africa of HIV, while patients in Europe were chronified and they would not die of AIDS. And this was a huge problem, and there were many complaints. And at the end, I think. The therapies arrived also to Africa, in part I think because of India. In India were actually breaking the patents and making the same drugs much cheaper, and then they could bring them to Africa.
And I like that story because it says that as a society we do have the power to try and put inequalities right. It may be in the short term that this is a technology that is used on a privileged few, but if we put enough pressure behind governments and the people who control these sorts of medicines and behind biotechnology companies, the story of the HIV medicine shows us that, as a society we do have a tremendous power to change things. So I think these are really genuine concerns and we need to be thinking about them, but I feel hugely optimistic for the future. We have a lot of problems facing our society at the moment. The ageing population, the rising rate of disease, biodiversity loss, but there are clever people out there coming up with ideas that could make a difference, and I, having listened to Maria and many other people, I feel very optimistic about what the future may bring.
Muy bien.
Very good. For me, it was an honor sharing the stage with you, being here, introducing, moderating this discussion, presenting you both as speakers, talking about all these topics. I think it was very fruitful, not only from the scientific point of view, but also regarding ethics and moral. And that's all I have to say on my side. Thank you to all of you for joining us in this wonderful afternoon, and we'll give you a round of applause. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
creo que tenemos un reloj.
Sí.
I think we have a clock somewhere.
Pues yo creo que podemos comenzar, ¿no?
I think we can start, right? Good afternoon, everybody. I think you've been having a very interesting discussion, looking to the future, to a future where science will become more and more important. And now, in this case, in this forum, Foro de la Cultura, we are going to open a different window. We'll try to open the window and try and see whether there is an alternative model, economic model, different from the one that is managing our lives in present times. Different, with different criteria, different from profitability, and for doing that, since a few years ago, with a book that was Total Revolution, we have Christian Felber. He has been let that seed grow little by little, and he will tell us later. He's been growing that seed in little communities, universities, companies, in places where they've received or welcomed, especially passionately, all his theory about common good. Away from traditional models in economy. And our Ministry for Culture and Sports is not a conventional character either. Throughout his career as a cultural manager, he's been able to start projects that were away from conventional models. We all remember, people from Madrid especially, I'm referring to his management in La Casa Encendida, which became a model for all of us to follow due to the fresh air that it brought to the city. It was a whole new perspective for our culture, and it attracted many different models, and I hope that during this new stage as a Ministry for Culture you can do similar things. There's something interesting. Both of them are majors in philology. So I don't know what we're gonna get from this discussion, but I'm sure some interesting bridges. I also want to greet those people following us on streaming. Let me remind you the hashtag that you can use to follow today's discussion. You have it there on the screen, and you will have the opportunity to ask some questions, those of you who are here today in this wonderful venue in Fundación Telefónica. We will save some time for questions. But Christian, I would like to ask you to give you the floor so you can start this discussion with a brief introduction about how this economical theory is changing, how it's disrupting us, how it's disrupting the economic models, taking into account that we are living in a moment where conventions are not so clear either. We have ultra-protectionist trends, we have models that are changing, the conventional models that we were familiar with.
Cuando cambian los
Well, in the great transitions, where the paradigms change, the heterodoxia can become orthodoxia. In this context, I like to remember Jean Monnet, because we are suffering the current economic model. At least great majorities in both wealthy and poor countries are designing a new narrative. And a few days ago I was in the European Parliament, and everybody was saying, at least after the panels, that we are desperate looking for a new narrative for Europe. And Jean Monnet, in one of his last writings, he said that if I have to start again, I will start by culture. I think this is significant, because economy is not the most important thing. It should be a tool at the service of the flourishing cultures, of democratic cultures, and of sustainable civilizations. And obviously it is not. And this is why there are great majorities all around the world that are willing for a change of model, and the economy of the common good offers this new alternative narrative that, when we look closer, this is nothing new. It's just reminding us some important things that we had forgotten, starting by the name of economy itself. The meaning of the economy of common good is a complete and consistent model where economic activities are oriented towards common good and not towards profit or financial challenges or the growth of the GDP. This seems to be something strange, but if we go back to the original meaning of economy in Greek, Aristotle would guide us and would show two different and opposite concepts of economy. He said, oikonomy is the healthy economy, is a way of managing your house using ethical rules, fair rules, that respect the dignity of human beings towards a purpose, and the purpose is the well-being of everyone in the house. Nowadays, economy defines itself and the science that researches on the efficient use of scarce resources. And where's the purpose? We don't have a purpose anymore, and it has to be an objective science. This is an illusion. This is lying to ourselves, because there's no objective science. We know this. We've known this for 100 years, but the economy does not recognize this fact. And also in the name, the second part is nomos, after the oikos, which nomos are the ethical rules. We need these rules. This is social science, and in social science we have to do things with a purpose and with awareness, and these are ethical rules, and we have to create a fair design of economy, a sustainable design of economy in order to get a purpose, and the purpose should be the common good, as Aristotle said. These are some reminders of some things that we have forgotten. And the last thing Aristotle said is that money is just a means to get an end, a purpose. And if it had to be the other way around, if money would be the purpose of economic or artistic activities, it would not be economy, but its opposite. It would be krematistike in ancient Greek, which is the art of making money. In current terms, it will be capitalism. And Aristotle said capitalism is the opposite of economy. This is brilliant. This is a brilliant idea, because today when we criticize capitalism, we say that socialism is not a solution. It is okay, but it's not the only alternative to capitalism. The other alternative, the other opposite of capitalism, is economy, according to Aristotle. And if we look closer, economy is an economy for common good, which should be the original purpose, its original purpose in the Greek culture. So it's just bringing back the original meaning of economy and declare it is an alternative to capitalism. However, if we analyze the constitutions, this has been executed, this has been analyzed in all the constitutions of democratic countries that mention anything, something about the purpose of economy. The purpose is supposed to be the common good. The capital is supposed to be a means, not a purpose. But this is only beautiful ideas, or is this something relevant? Well, we say this is relevant, this is important, because when we make it clear what's the purpose and what's a means, we can measure success, because success can be measured according to the achievement of a purpose, but not with the disposal or availability of the means. This is what we do nowadays. First, we control the means, the financial profit, the monetary GDP. This is wrong. Success should be measured according to achievement of purposes, and in an economy the purpose would be the common good, and the product of the common good for the national economy, the balance of the common good for companies, and also the control of common good for investment. Only with an investment does not go against principal values and against the common good could it be funded and executed. But before the financial risk analysis, it is also necessary, the financial risk analysis, but first we need an ethical risk analysis. And the balances of common good measure what is the contribution of a company to the common good in its widest meaning. We have developed a methodology that's been used by over 500 companies, some of them in Spain. And the most important element is that nowadays the companies that are doing things wrong, the fault players, have an advantage compared to fair players. Adam Smith, that was supposed to be the most important economist in history, which was not an economist, he was a philosopher, even a moral philosopher. He was an expert in ethics, and he dreamed of a good balance between the individual success of a corporation and the success of society as a whole. That was a dream that never came true, because still nowadays a corporation might succeed without contributing to the wealth of a nation, but making it poorer, as they lay off many employees, they destroy the environment, they discriminate against women, and they go against democratic values. This is possible. The other way around is also possible. They can contribute to all aspects of common good, but we know of the theory of gaming that between foul players and fair players, those who win eventually are the fault players, but because they don't have principles. And we have to stop this with the common good. We want to stop this with the common good. Companies have to measure how much they contribute to the purposes of society, and how these purposes are measured according to their principal values: dignity, sustainability, justice, solidarity, and democracy. And only when they contribute in a positive way to the common good and the development of the society, they can keep on operating. But when they make something wrong for society, they have to stop operating, and we have to link the result of the balance of the common good to legal incentives. My last point, this is the price relationship today. The more responsible, sustainable, ethical companies nowadays have higher costs, and they have to take more things into consideration compared to the dumping companies in all activities, and this is why they have higher prices for consumers, and this is a disadvantage, a competitive disadvantage, and this makes no sense. And we can correct this by linking these legal incentives to the result of the balance of the common good. These ones pay less taxes, less tariffs, they get loans with better conditions. These ones get priority for state contracting, and that's it, making ethical products more affordable for consumers. We have reached an ethical design of the market economy, a consistent design. In this context, we will still have the liberty to buy rubbish products, but if they are more expensive than the ethical products, nobody will buy them. Well, so far for the theory, but the product of the common good, and this is my last point, we are already looking for alternatives to the GDP. This is good news. the purposes of the sustainable development can be considered the best product, the first product of the economy of the common good. In Bhutan, they have an evaluation, an assessment of national gross happiness. They are running queries and questionnaires on happiness. Our proposal is that citizens will get together in their communities, in their municipalities, and will design all together the rates of regional common good. And this includes the 20 most important elements of quality of life, and then we can go down to the synthesis at national or international level, and also this product of the common good that's made in democratic terms will indicate what's most important in our lives according to the values of citizens. So far, this movement started in 2010 in Austria, southern Germany and northern Italy. Now it is in 10 countries in only 8 years. We work with companies, over 500 companies that support us, also municipalities. Tomorrow I have to go to Villena, close to Alicante. That will be certified as a common good municipality, and I'm coming from Salamanca because there are now an increasing number of universities that are cooperating in teaching and implementing these balances of the common good. The first university with a balance of common good was the University of Barcelona. We signed by a proposal of the director of the University of Salamanca a document for the development of the economy of the common good. This is another good example to explain how we work, in addition to the 15 local groups that we have in Spain, we currently have in Spain, where citizens can take part in the co-creation and implementation of this model in practice.
Thank you very much. You brought me this book, the application to business of this model, common good economy, developed by a teacher in the university in Valencia, right? Yes, and he's not only a teacher, he's not only a professor, he's also an expert in the common good model. Yes, professors and the academia, they all have been one of the most important agents. They were asking for a redesign of the concept. In any case, one of the indicators for this common good economy should be culture, right? Access to culture, the access citizens have to culture, the options to speak with that cultural voice, the spaces, the way they can speak about culture. If we think about a happy and democratic society, a balanced society, culture is an essential part of our lives, isn't it? And Christian was talking about the need to regulate or to intervene at a certain level so that companies that are committed to common good, governments that are committed to common good can bring benefit to people who practice it. Should that be in culture that same way, Minister?
Well, I completely agree with what Christian has said. As a philologist, it's really I find it really interesting that he has started with the etymology of the terms of economy by Aristotle, because you mentioned Casa Encendida. When I was the director there, I've been invited to many places to explain this, to explain the model of the Casa Encendida. I don't know if that was a model. Many young people would pose the question because they thought that Casa Encendida was an example of modernity, and we always had to hear this question. The question was, what do you have to do to be modern? And I said, you need to know Latin. And then I explained it. I believe that culture should be the base and the foundations for any social building, any collective construction. So culture as a foundation has different layers and sediments, and if you don't know the origin of the problems that we currently have, it's very hard to make a good diagnosis and find solutions. This is the answer to many questions that we currently posing ourselves. These questions were the same questions for the old Greeks. The only thing that changes are the questions, and the questions have reduced. So the evolution of society, at a time these answers seem to move forward, but at some point that I think was the 19th century and the last half of the 20th century, with the policies of Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher and all the neoliberalism, this has been forgotten. Economy is at the service of profit. It is at the service of stakeholders. We have all become stakeholders, but they have not told us that the result of our investment could be something more than money, could be helping to build a better society, helping to build better societies, communities, and all this message that is central now. And initiatives like the initiative of Christian and other initiatives, what they are trying to do is to find a balance. But I think that we are in a society of inequity. Now we are looking for a balance of survival balance, not in terms of values of society, but there are people that say we have these values, we should not forget these values, but I don't think that they are properly implemented. So I think we are in a time of total crisis of what means society and what means culture as a force for balance, as the base and foundation of a better society. And I explain this. Culture is generated when two people sit at a table and start speaking, and they share ideas, thoughts. This is the origin of culture. What I mean by this is that the origin of culture is sharing knowledge, sharing ideas, sharing thoughts, sharing concerns, sharing questions, and starting a dialogue on this and multiplying this until it gets a whole community. What has happened to culture? Culture has become a show, a quality show in most cases, and as it has become a show where you have a barrier, which is you have on one side creators or artists and then spectators or viewers, we have cut the link of communication. So I think the base of culture must be communication and then sharing what's being communicated. In that sense, the internet, that at the beginning was a great idea, which is sharing with the whole planet all thoughts and ideas and all the information. With time we realize that it becomes tools not for creating community but for creating different groups within the community, most times are opposed. Most times when you look at the social media, all you see is insult and offense and lack of critical thinking. So the social media are becoming instruments for manipulation based on fake news, and this happens because the network is done by someone at individual level. Is someone at their place or in a park alone writing or alone reading, and there's no dialogue, there is no debate, there's no communication. So in that sense, I believe culture might play a role if we turn it into a space for communication and a space for sharing things and of generating new things, where the position of the creator and the position of the viewer cease to be different and converge in a common forum. But in order to reach this, we need citizens that want to do this, that have this ability and have this interest. And there is something key there, which is education. It's nice to see that the Parliament a few days ago passed a law to bring back the subject of philosophy to secondary education, but this is after a mistake in 1998, which is taking away philosophy or Old Greek and Latin from the school curriculums, and the same thing might have happened in other countries like in China or in India with Sanskrit. So language is the vehicle of concepts, of ethical concepts. So the language is here because there is a need to live together, to coexist. If the origin of language and all the message of language is put apart, and we see that people write with codes that we cannot understand, like in WhatsApp or in chats, where the great tool that everyone has, which is incorporating with their language capability, incorporating their critical thinking capability, is being lost. So what is this disaster based on? This is based on the lack of, on the loss of the idea of community, and also setting individuality as a priority. I think, I do, I believe. So listen, sir, why would you think in such an individual way? Why would you act in such an individual way? What's your resume as a citizen? The liberty of speech, the freedom of speech, is not the freedom to say whatever, and especially of insulting or offending or ill-treating someone. So what can a ministry do, or any entity, any body? A ministry, a region, a municipality? I believe that municipalities are essential institutions for generating culture and for generating the understanding of culture in a community that they can reach, because this goes one by one. Journalists always ask, how many visitors did you have at Casa Encendida? The museum Reina Sofia has more visitors than El Prado. And these are always figures, and you tell them the figures. And I always say, if a 1% of those who had been here have learned anything about what they've seen, and what they've seen has generated in them any emotions or thoughts that have served to change their point of view, it's enough for me. I'm satisfied. So my goal is not 3 million visitors for the Prado, but just a few. Their visit to the Prado has changed their lives, or some aspects of their lives. So the first aspect of culture is quantifying without understanding what's culture itself. Culture is a way of improving your individual life that can be transferred to a community to change the life of a community. So the first thing that should be done is promoting participation spaces. Only from participations we will be able to generate something that's solid in cultural terms. This happens in all fields, no matter if it's an expert forum with the 50 best experts of the world to know what we need to do to preserve the Guernica, or that in a square, in a village, 3 old people get together with 3 young people and they transfer knowledge on their environment, on the environment where they live, so that they can incorporate this to their lives. I think both things are essential, but at different levels. And the first statement I can make is that the concept of high and low culture is a snob term. It's a snob concept. There are different levels and different levels of complexity. These levels of complexity have to be analyzed and measured. But my experience in Reina Sofia is a difficult place where you had to start at 9 a.m. and we will leave the place at 11 p.m. and sometimes you would think, okay, all this suffering, to what end? Why am I doing this? Am I doing this because of the money? No, because I can do other things. Just because I like the idea of being the director of a museum, just maybe a little bit. I'm a little bit of vanity, but vanity is not the only cause for doing such a thing. But eventually what I would go down to the halls of the museum to see what the audience were doing. This is for whom do I work? I work for citizens, so I want to see what the citizens were doing. And one thing you can do at the Reina Sofia Museum, we get many people that have no idea on contemporary art, and they come there to see Picasso's Guernica because this is an icon, and they might be from a neighbors association or community association, and they have a trip to come to Madrid and see Picasso's Guernica. But Guernica is in the middle of the collection, so until they get there they see other things, and when they see it, you leave and you have to see other things. So I would analyze what people with no idea on contemporary art would do, where they would stop to see. So uncultivated people would stop in front of the best pieces of art that we had there. Why is this? Well, this is the secret of creation. This is an object, just a picture. This is a piece of canvas with some painting, with some paint on it. There's no secret. There's no new invention about this. But what's the power of creation? The power of creation is to trigger emotions, as San Juan de la Cruz said, is to move something that where you don't understand something with reason, but you can understand it in a different way, and it takes you to reasoning something that will generate a word. So if this is so if art has this power to call together people who know about art and people who have no idea about art, culture is to be measured in this same field, in this common field, this field of everyone. But this is not demagogical. This is a field where every individual has to have an opportunity to take part in something collective, and the ministry and the public institutions have to generate spaces of participation where knowledge can take place, sensitivity can exist, and especially communication among people. Without these foundations, without this base, and this is why I mostly agree with the theories of Christian How can we do this? Well, there are many things that we have to do. We have to protect creators so that they can create in the best possible conditions. And this is what we are doing now with the Statute of the Artist, which is a material improvement of the conditions for creation from the labor point of view, social point of view, meaning that creators are not within the work arrangement in Spain, something apart from until generating spaces where citizens can share creation and contribute their point of view.
Give me just a few minutes, because I think it was interesting how both of you talk about the perversion of the economy. We see how that common objective had that goal of creating more prosperous societies. We should conceive culture not as mere entertainment. And both of you were talking about city councils and municipalities. And I was reading something in El País. I read a discussion about how cities like Malaga, for example, they've become, they've opened little museums that have transformed the tissue of the cultural tissue of the city. And some local creators believe that there are no spaces actually, because as soon as something becomes big museums, points of attraction for tourists, it's true that that may be a cultural success, but at the same time a failure when it comes to creating a space that is truly rich in creation, in creativity, right? So how can we combine those two things? Because, well, you need municipalities, city councils that have companies that manage resources in a profitable manner, so you can get a return on that investment for the citizens, right? That's the accounts, the bank account, the balance accounts of companies, right? So how do we live with that contradiction?
Well, we're seeing a world that's decomposing. This is an analysis that I think we share. And you have mentioned Margaret Thatcher, that in the 1980s said that we only exist as individuals, but we don't exist as social beings. So she eliminated in just one stroke. Sorry, I need to drink some water.
Oh yes, don't drink. Go ahead, because you've had so many meetings and classes, lessons in universities, all the agreements you're signing, so your voice is resenting. It's easier if you do it with tweets, right? Because if you want to do it live, maybe you'll lose your voice.
Well, Jakarta, Buenos Aires, Mexico City, and the outcome of eliminating our social dimension is this fragmentation, this individualization, this isolation of individuals. And we are losing social cohesions, the public goods, social security, and democracy itself, because this is a collective thing, not an individual one. And the economy of the common good is the sticker for all these decomposition processes, and a place where it best works are municipalities, because no matter what the decisions made by national governments, because at the municipalities they can take measures to correct these mistakes. The consequences of the free market at any cost, for example, the existence of tax paradise, this goes against municipalities, so they have some capacity to correct this, but it's not an unlimited capability, because they are also sometimes the losers in this processes, but also with a minimal level of independence and autonomy, they can implement alternatives in all fields, from economy to agriculture. We have and they are doing it. We have sustainable cities, we have fair market cities, we have cultural diversity cities. But this perspective that looks very good should not make us become passive, and think that the national governments have no responsibilities. And what we're thinking now is that national governments, in many cases, and obviously the sport and culture ministers are not leading this process towards post-democracy, but the national governments are. And this is a term taken from Colin Crouch, English politologist, that analyzes that the formal elements of democracy are in place. We choose from a plurality of political parties that form governments in parliaments, and there are many bodies and agencies and constitutional tribunals to defend constitutions against the wrongdoings of parliaments. So everything seems to be working right at first sight, by the results of these national governments and parliaments in an increasing number of cases do not represent the needs, the convictions and the values of citizens as a group. This is starting with free market. In many countries they don't have a majority of the population, but this is being imposed on everyone and conferring an increasing level of power to the big corporations, instead of creating a public Facebook, a public access to the internet, free of charge, and offering an alternative based on free of charge cooperation of Creative Commons. And this is allowing the big corporations to enter, and they are already too powerful to coexist with them. And at the same time we can see a high level of inequity. We have a figure: 6 people have the same property as half of the population of the world. The number 1 millionaire in the world has over $100 billion. And so the inequity in income is 350,000 times more than the minimum legal salary. And this is allowed by the parliaments, even though citizens, well, we believe in a game of democracy where we want citizens to take part, because if the participation is reduced to political parties, this is maybe not the end of democracy, but at least the death of democracy. So we believe in a higher involvement of citizens. So we call this sovereign body, which is our collective dimension, and we invite citizens and encourage citizens to make these fundamental decisions to correct parliaments in those questions where these cultural pillars are needed, because ethical pillars are always cultural pillars. In the heart of culture are values, and they are lacking in parliaments. Citizens could participate there in our games that we're deploying in many countries. The results that we are seeing, sometimes we hear messages like there should be no limitation to inequity, because if there is or this way we'll finish with liberty. Some people are very aggressive, very loud. They have an unlimited financial power, but if we take a look at the population, they can be forgotten. And the proposal is the inequity factor 10. where there could be some inequity, but the maximum income could not be 10 times the minimum income. This is an example of how citizens could take part in relevant democratic decisions, and the result would be a different culture, a different culture of inequity, a different culture based on the fundamental value of justice.
But what happens, it's very interesting what you're saying. If we want to have citizens that don't limit themselves to just vote every 4 years, it's true that we need to act in the domain where we feel our capacity to act together, to press, to speak on our behalf. That's where we can feel that we can have a direct influence, because then in higher structures, the problem that we have in Europe is that it's not easy for the institution to make citizens believe that it's an agent interacting with them. So to act at a regional, local level, we need to recuperate that human level, because we've lost our trust in the institutions. So globalization has had very positive effects, a few negative ones, but some people are taking advantage of this to take us back to the medieval ages in terms of commerce, right?
Well, when I mention municipalities, a municipality could be the city hall of Madrid with 3 million inhabitants, or of a smaller town.
Yes, no, I mean more at a human scale, right?
And I mean in terms of being closer to citizens and living together with citizens. What you do in a district of Madrid, there's some people that see each other every day. They take their children to the same school. They see each other in the supermarket. So there might be some familiar atmosphere. And you can take this to any level, to any scale, but the idea is to be everyone on the same strategy, or with a similar strategy, or with a strategy that might not be the same one, but that can converge. The problem is that we have turned people into consumers, and consumption is not very nice. You have a limit of what you earn, and the more social inequity there is, the more lack of satisfaction you are creating. So what you are doing is you're promoting something that cannot be afforded by citizens. So now we have a debate about this 900 euros of minimal salary, and some people say this will make us lose jobs, but this is by people from big corporations that are making millions a year. So maybe the way to stop losing jobs is that instead of taking care of the limit of the salary on the lower end, I was speaking with someone from IBEX 35, and he was concerned about this, and I was thinking, I knew this guy had a salary of millions a year, and he said, how can he be concerned about someone that's making 700 a month and is going to be making 900? So this gotta be kidding. So when the banks say something about salaries, let's take a look about the salaries in the banking industry. Maybe the problem is not the lower salaries, it's the higher salaries. But there's a question there, which is the tax policy. So we will admit that you can make as much money as you want depending on the board of administrators of your company, but then you'll have to pay the taxes that can compensate this. And when I say people, I mean companies, enterprises. The problem is also enterprises. Google, YouTube, Apple, they make more money than the GDP of many countries. So there should be some regulation on this. Of course, I won't go against the liberty of business. This is included in our constitution, but there would be some checks and balances that will compensate this. The contemporary problem is inequity. The rate of inequity has multiplied exponentially. This is the main contemporary problem. There's a concentration of power and resources in so few hands that it is very hard that we can control this socially. So culture and I go back to the origin because I don't want to be too radical. Christian is here to be radical. The culture, what it has to give people is to offer tools to think, to learn, and to reflect upon things in order to become committed citizens and not just frustrated consumers, because no matter how much money you make, you earn, at some point, if you are a consumer, you will be frustrated because this year I have bought a car that's better than the one I had before, but I bought this one because I couldn't buy another one that was better. So the improvement of consumption generates the perversion of unhappiness, because there will always be something that you cannot afford, that your neighbor can afford, that someone else that you see on TV or whatever can afford, but you can't. So all these programs, all these projects that I see that in 3 years, in 5 years, they're going to solve these problems, I don't think they will work.
Yes, they start coexisting with more reasonable projects, more reasonable concepts, ideas that may be respectful with the environment, right? Yes, but that's a priority. Yes, now they start organizing themselves, right? Because something good of this social media and networks is that they are not only used for evil, but they sometimes also organize themselves, and they have a power of influence on those who are making decisions, right? So as it was the case, for example, with climate change, for example, so many people demanding for actions, for changes to fight against climate change. I would like to dedicate some minutes to give the floor to the audience in case you have some questions. I still have a few that we could go over, but I don't know if some of our people in the audience here may have a question. Do you have any questions? We have the microphone if you want to ask any questions. Yes, over here, please. Yes. Thank you, José María. Yes, my name is Gonzalo Carmona. I come from Fura dels Baus, and I would like to ask Christian Felber how, from the theory of the common good, how you structure the sustainable development goals. And I would like to ask the minister, we were talking about the space where the creator and the audience coexist, in which way we can create some inclusive models to include the audience. Thank you.
Bien.
La fuera del Baus, that's great.
No, eso no nos lo...
Because, well, Christian is a dancer also. He didn't tell us, and I don't think it's my role here to say that, but yes, well, it doesn't always come up, but yes, I'm a dancer.
Pues los ODS...
Well, as for the Sustainable Development Goals, this could be an alternative to the GDP that has been the only indicator that should reflect everything that was good, and this has proved to be wrong. And therefore we're looking for alternatives, and there are several alternatives, from the Index of a Better Life, the National Gross Happiness, and also the Sustainable Development Goals proposed by the United Nations. And we don't like them because they include economic growth, which is not a purpose. It might be a strategy, but they're still much better than GDP alone. So we are supporting alternatives in that line. Well, my preference is that citizens should choose the 20 most relevant aspects, and probably economic growth would not be one of them. Secondly, how they can be implemented, these diverse goals, from eliminating poverty, reducing inequity, protecting cultural diversity, and also fostering responsible consumption, and the tools that we have developed for the municipalities, for example, the common good balance, and for corporations also the common good balance. And according to the first scientific research, these tools have proved to be efficient to implement the sustainable development goals at local level, and also in corporations, including SMEs. So this would be an adjustment or a combination of the macroeconomic parameters at international level and the tools available at local level. This is an adjustment of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals and the 20 aspects of the 20 most relevant aspects of the common goods, and this is a concrete and specific matching. So they are all linked to one of the others. And going back to the elimination of poverty and the reduction of inequity, the first tries to move in this line, in this direction, are being done in municipalities and in the provinces. And an example I'd like to give you is Portland, Oregon, in the United States. They have made a decision that the companies that have inequity over 100 times between the highest salary and the lowest salary, they have to pay an extra tax of 10% at local level. And if the inequity is over 200 times, they have to pay an extra tax of 25%. This is a specific measure. An example in Switzerland, a municipality or a regional parliament has decided that the inequity in the income of public banks can define an absolute limit that cannot be over 10 times the minimum income in these same banks. This is another example at regional level. I think that the first thing is to eliminate barriers. The first barrier is language. Creators are increasingly addressing their potential audience only for those who already in their thing. And I've spoken this before being minister in the Association of Directors of Contemporary Art of Spain, where I was a member. Well, the first thing I said was, for whom are we programming? Because we are programming for ourselves eventually, so that our little world, say how modern, how brilliant is Paul Smith, who's the director of this center. If you go to a small town in Spain with a contemporary art center, in a place where there is nothing that has opened the way before getting there, and you see what you have to see, you say, well, you really have to love it to to visit this art center, because nothing can be understood. And I'm saying it, and I'm coming from this world, and the same goes from the image that we get from many shows. We are projecting an image that's for people who know already about this. A few days ago I was speaking with Maris Carmena about some cultural issues, and I said, Maris, if everything is good, but we don't have is the basis, the foundations. So what are the district cultural centers that are very good in Madrid? What are they programming? In the programming of Centro, Matadero, we all know who's addressing, but what's happening in the districts? I think that the best barrier that we have to overcome is the barrier of language, which is oral language, visual language, concept language. I mean, how many people that has never been to theater would go to a theater production in an elite center because of the image, because of the banner that they see of the play? So what we call the primary marketing. Many few people, because they don't understand anything. So I believe we have seen a process of elitization of cultural manifestations, and at the same time we have made it more democratic cultural manifestations. And what we have to do now what I say is that private money should be spent by the owners of this money, but the public money has to be spent with a criterion of universal accessibility for all audiences. One of the criticisms that I jokingly make to my colleagues is that in all contemporary art spaces and venues, the keystone now, the key concept now, is the new audiences. We have never before spoken so much about the audience and the new audiences. And I always say jokingly, and maybe this is not very politically correct, but let's go. I always say, you are doing everything for the audience without the audience, but with public money. Meaning that the amount of public money that's been spent on speaking about the public but not addressing the public is very high. And for those of you who have heard some of my lectures, I always give a metaphoric example, which is in the work The Public by Garcia Lorca, in the play of Garcia Lorca, which is a reflection of who am I writing for, of a mature author. The play starts with the director is alone on stage, and an assistant comes and says, "Sir, the public is there," and the director says, "Let them come in." And then 4 white horses come on stage, and this beautiful symbol is not only the symbol of purity, of the message of that the public, the audience, has to be understood as a pure animal, not as an impure animal, but also of the unpredictable. Because why someone who does not know anything about art, contemporary art, goes to see the Guernica in the Reina Sofia, and they stop before of a work of Joan Miró, which was a small one called Spanish Ballerina, and not in front of a 2 meters Miró of the most commercial time of Miró, because the Spanish Ballerina is better than the other one from the 1970s by Miró. And someone who's not an expert in art, just by watching, why do they decide, or why do they choose the best one? This is because the audience is a pure animal if they are set free. We let them act freely, but if we condition and guide them and educate them for what we want, we will be doing something else. We will be manipulating but not generating spaces, because the audience is a creator, in my view. Artwork has 2 creators, the author and each of the viewers that enjoy it, interpret it, feel it, suffer it. In my view, the audience is just another creator, like the audience in a theater play is like the landscape. Landscape is a human concept. The idea of landscape without human beings would not exist, because nature does not work using aesthetic principles, but based on different needs, which is the natural needs. So I think this is about overcoming barriers and also taking the public and the audience more seriously. This will be a first measure, and there's a first measure to move forward.
You also reflect upon this in La Fura a lot, right? Yes, we were the first ones. I think we had another question. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed this evening. Thank you, Montserrat. Congratulations for your moderation, and also Christiana and the Minister. I would like to highlight something, or maybe show an optimistic view about how I think we've created in Europe and the Western world the biggest well-being space that we've had in history and centuries of history. I really think that we should have more philologists working in this field, because it was amazing hearing you quoting Aristotle. We're living much better than in the times of Aristotle. I think that humankind in its as a whole is having a better life. It's true that we have inequalities, but countries living in democracy, our health, our life expectancy, it's true. But parliaments are going along a way, and then citizens are on a different path. We've had many examples of these related to left-wing trends and also to right-wing trends. I think that we always need to preserve the legitimacy of institutions, but the system we have, I think that in general has been working pretty well. It does need some repairs, but Europe, the Western world, is working pretty well. Everybody in the world wants to come here, right? We have other examples, but people want to move to Europe or the United States, right? In spite of all our defects. So on my point of view, this criticism is something that pretends to fix a whole situation that has very positive elements. Thank you. In my case, I don't like going against the system. If you're a minister, there's no way you can be against the system, right? And if there's a contradiction in that, I'll take my responsibility. I don't share some of the things that Christian said, but I understand where they're coming from, and I understand that the system, if we understand that it's a positive system, that democracy is a positive system, it needs for each individual to feel it that way, so we can become a community and act as a collective, as a group. And I think that more and more people are feeling out. They feel that they don't belong to this system because they are not integrated positively in the system. So that's why I believe that we need to work with individuals one by one to generate that community feeling, that feeling of belonging. There was a very good example of what you're saying. You were saying that back in Aristotle times they had slaves. And there was a recent movie by Woody Allen, Midnight in Paris, and there was a moment where they went back to Picasso's time, and then they kept going back and back in the past, and they keep going back because Marion Cotillard, her character, thought that it would be even better. And then when they got there, but they saw that they didn't have drugs for their toothache, then she didn't want to go back in the past anymore. So I think that, yes, from many different points of view, we're much better now. But I also think that we have some fragile fear in our context. If we are not able to turn that inequality pyramid upside down, we are in trouble. But we are active. We are being proactive about these. Each of us have to work in our own fields. I don't know if maybe Christian has a more radical point of view about these. Yes, Christian, maybe your last reflection about this. Yes, I'm in favor of the system. Not one can be more in favor of the system than myself. If we are talking about democracy and about happiness of people, these are my priorities, and I advocate for these against anybody. But about the first question, are we going back towards our worst version or to the best possibility? We could mention many examples about going in the good direction or going in the bad one, but who is going to judge that? Who is going to judge the indicators? I think that the outcome of the common good model would be all of ours, because it needs to include 50 different elements for our well-being, and that's where we would have a proof of how well we are developing, of how good we are evolving. But which are the most relevant indicators? I always talk about macroeconomic indicators, GDP, commercial rates, everything is improving, but that's not relevant. That's why most of the population is saying that they don't feel well. So the loss of biodiversity would be a terrible risk. For example, in Costa Rica a few days ago, the professor that invited us told us how he was going for a walk a few days ago, and he had to tell his son, when I was your age, biodiversity was twice as big as it is now, and that means we're losing richness in just one generation. It's amazing. It's the biggest impoverishment that we can experience. In Austria and Germany, we have bees and butterflies, insects in general, that are dying, that are becoming extinct. Many systems are very resilient, so they take this over the time. But then we get to a point where the system, the environment in this case, collapses. And this is very dangerous. And it is more relevant than any other well-being indicators. In Germany, we sleep worse than we did years ago. Why? Because our trust in public spaces has dropped drastically, and that eroded trust has very negative effects. So that's why we're sleeping worse. We don't rest in our sleep. A few days ago, I met a neuroscientist, and she told me how, for the first time in history, the parasympathetic system does not allow for generation of cells during the night. And these are very good examples of those negative effects. Maybe you're right. You have examples that we are improving. I have examples that we are going back. But it's not only these three indicators of our well-being, but 1 out in 2 countries, they have their own well-being indicators, and they are all decreasing. Maybe this is a lack of statistics, but I think we should be alarmed. And then secondly, about the lack of legitimacy of institutions. Of course, I don't want to I don't doubt about the legitimacy of our institutions. But there are some dysfunctions that we are saying, and well, the solution is not to get rid of those institutions, but we need to find a new structure and to find new agents. And I totally agree that we have to be careful, and we mustn't give access to just anybody, but we have to transfer some powers to the citizens, and we need to transfer powers to the parliament. What could be the mistake, if we talk about mistakes? What could be the worst mistake, possible mistake? Well, going to war, in my case, in my opinion. And who makes decisions about going to or participating in a war or not? Governments. The Spanish government, a few years ago, they decided to go to war against Iraq, and I think it was a big mistake. And we know, thanks to the surveys that were carried out, that citizens didn't want to go to war. And we are seeing cases like this, and that all the cases, governments made the decision against the public opinion. And what is the solution for this? The solution is not avoid the power to make those decisions on behalf of the government, but maybe we shouldn't transfer that power to the citizens either. I'm not saying that, but we need to reflect upon some changes in this paradigm. Yes, there's no doubt that there's an element that maybe we can use to assess how well we're doing is, well, the world our children will inherit from us, right? If it's better or worse than the one we had. Yes, the parliament of young people, maybe they can decide what are the 20 most important relevant goals in our world. Probably they would reduce inequalities. I would certainly let them work out solutions for these. Thank you very much, Minister Christian. Thank you very much to both of you for being here, and for those of you following us on streaming. Thank you.